Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hi, I'm Rory, and with me, as always, is Ken. How are you, Ken?
Exceptionally well. Hope you are well too, Rory, and I hope that you are well listening to this podcast. You've joined us at episode 163 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. 3 sections today, starting off with our student check-in, where we kind of check in with our student counsellors. And today we're going to be looking at questions that you need to ask at your placement interview. So stand by for that one. Then we're going to go into the Counselling Digital Revolution, where we look at how technology-based therapy is kind of developing in this age. And we're going to be speaking about something called the black hole effect. If you're working online, considering working online, you need to know about that one. And then we're going to end, as we always do, with practice matters, where we kind of dip our toe into what we might experience in practice for our qualified practitioner listeners. And we're going to be looking at preparing to work with self-harm. What do we do when self-harm kind of presents itself within our therapy room? And the statistics are pretty frightening of how prevalent, I guess the word is, for self-harm is. So important topic, which we will be getting to. But we start with our student check-in, questions to ask at a placement interview. And Rory, I guess it is that time, as we're making this live, that students might be preparing level 4 students might be preparing to go into their placements. They might be thinking about getting a placement. And there comes a time when you get an interview and you're called in, and they interview you and they ask you a whole lot of questions. But it's a two-way dialogue, isn't it? The student gets to ask questions too, Rory.
Absolutely, and lots of activity about this recently in our Facebook group. And if you're not a member of our Facebook group, then go to Facebook, type in Counselling Tutor. You'll find us. Knock on the door. We're a closed group. We're a friendly bunch. We'll let you in, and you'll be amongst thousands of like-minded people who are in the world of counselling and psychotherapy. We have tutors. We have people who are students. We also have qualified colleagues. And this question has come up so much in the Facebook group recently, and certainly letters in the post bag, about placements, because it's about this time of year, at the time of recording this in September of 2020. People are thinking about going into placements, students thinking of going into placements. And one of the questions I get asked a lot is, what questions will the placement ask me? And I think that one of the questions that never gets asked is, what should I ask the placement? If you're going for an interview, then you should ask the placement questions. And I think there's some pertinent questions that really need to be asked. And one of those, I think, is really important for someone who is just going into practice, getting their first client hours, is, what is the assessment procedure?
Yes.
I think that is super, super important. It is a way of gauging the kind of ethical kind of quality of a placement. The answer to that question will tell you all you need to know about the placement, because if you're starting off as a student, placement managers should be sending you clients that are, and I don't want to dismiss people's concerns or how they're feeling, but they shouldn't be complex cases. You shouldn't be dealing with in-depth trauma or very, very complex relational issues. You should be dealing with what we used to term the worried well. And I think that asking the question is of how clients are allocated, what's the screening procedure, is a very pertinent question to ask.
I agree with you. And, this goes into something that's not just about going into a placement. It's about being a counsellor or a psychotherapist in general, in that we are always called, when looking at a client's presentation, to ask ourselves, is this presentation within my competence range? We're continuously kind of self-assessing our own competence. And when you're going out as a placement counsellor, the truth is you're learning to ride a bicycle with the little stabilizer wheels on. You need the support. You need someone there behind you, holding the bike, making sure that it goes in a straight line to support you while you gain your momentum and learn how to work ethically and safely with clients. And having the agency assess the clients before they come to you, vitally important. It's like, you wouldn't take your stabilizer bike and enter the Tour de France, because you're not going to get anywhere. You may block people's way and create damage in that. So you would hope that somebody would go out and assess the right race, that you would feel okay and confident to ride your little bike with the stabilizers on as you're going out. And I think that this goes two ways. Number one, it is in service of the clients that assessment is done correctly, so that we do no harm. That's that non-maleficence. It's kind of echoes through any ethical body. Do no harm, that we're there to help and serve. But on the other side, it's do no harm to you as a counsellor as well. If you have a horrific, horrifying experience in your first few hours of placement, that can be really unnerving. So it's about protecting you, and it's about protecting the clients, and of course the good name of counselling. So yes, definitely a question you want to be asking. Can you tell me what assessment process you have, so that I can understand how the clients are assessed before they get to me? Go ahead, Rory.
Yeah, absolutely, Ken. And I've had students, when I was teaching Ken and myself, had students who've come to us and said, I don't think I want to do this. It's too much of a responsibility. And when we've kind of inquired and asked them what's going on for them, they've been given clients that are just too complex for their level of experience and their level of skill and knowledge at that point. And if there is, if you are going into a placement, you really do need to think about that. I think the other thing to ask is, what other activities are offered by a placement? Do they offer CPD activities? A good placement should be a thriving arena of ideas in counselling and psychotherapy. And I think it's really useful when placements are running really well, for them to offer, maybe free or low-cost CPD activities, maybe even just group discussions on how different modalities of therapy works. Some of the most interesting conversations I had as a placement counsellor were actually in the tea room at my placement, where you'd meet other therapists and they'd say, well, I'm doing this, and you'd have different disciplines, and you'd have more experienced colleagues, and they would talk about their experiences. It should be a supportive environment. It shouldn't be go in, do your counselling, come home. It should be a supportive environment.
I agree. Supportive environment for your growth. It is during those placement hours, the 100 hours, the 200 hours, whatever it is that your course requires of you, that you kind of get to feel what counselling is like and be in a real counselling situation. It's there that you find out about what happens if something doesn't quite work out well in the counselling room. Who can I go to within my organisation and discuss that? How is that handled? Am I supported through that? In service of the client? That support is vital. And as you quite rightly said, Rory, what kind of support would kind of be in place for me while I'm doing my placement? It's not a one way where you come in, you do your hours. What do you get out of it? Well, you get to put a number on your hours sheet and we'll sign it. That's just not good enough. And I think that maybe some agencies don't understand that it's about nurturing the counsellor during that time, specifically if you're working with a specific client presentation. So I'm just going to use an example of working with bereavement. As an example, maybe your agency specializes in working with bereavement. You would expect that they would understand that from your formal training course, bereavement may be touched on really shallowly, and they would put something in place to kind of give you the information that you would need to bridge those gaps. So ask what support's in place. And sometimes there is a lot of support in place. They have practice discussions where you will all come together, not necessarily to discuss clients, but just to discuss how things are going in practice. There are sometimes practice events and get-togethers where you can kind of network and understand things from other people's perspective, different people, get to speak to people that are further down the road. As you said, Rory, so much learning in the tea room. Is it supportive? Are you going to be held through your process?
Absolutely. And of course, coffee is available.
Yes.
No letters in the post bag, please. Or water indeed. So that is incredibly important, to feel part of a supportive community. And I think the other question to ask is there clear referral pathways? Is there a person who deals with referrals, has links to maybe the community mental health team, has links to colleagues in drug and alcohol services, child protection services? Because you need. I think one of the things that's becoming really apparent in contemporary counselling practice is you can't do it on your own. The days of the single therapist, I think, who just works on their own with no connection to anybody else, have long gone. Everybody has connections or knowledge of referrals, how to refer. So I'd be asking that question as well, because in your practice you're going to have to make a referral. It's absolutely definite. You're going to be working with clients where you realize that maybe your level of knowledge or skill isn't sufficient to match the client's presentation. That's something to take to your supervisor and work through. Or you realize the client is coming for something other than therapy. That can happen quite a lot, certainly in charitable services. So what you need to know is where the referral pathways are and how those are activated so that you can offer a professional service.
Definitely. And, we're speaking here about questions that you should ask if you go for a placement interview. And it's a smart thing to do. And the reason it's a smart thing to do, and this kind of reflects the job market, really, when you go out and you have an interview in a job, that they generally leave a little space at the end where they say, I wonder if you have any questions. And they're really looking for your level of interest and understanding and involvement. If you go, oh no, I think everything has been answered, well, maybe that's fine. But if you go, actually, yes, I do, it shows a different level of commitment and it may just tick that little box for you. So it's definitely a smart thing to do. You certainly don't have to go in with a big long list and ask this and this and this and this and this, but definitely prepare some questions. Take some time to go ahead and have a look at the placements website if they have one, or their literature if they have that, to have an understanding, and that might inform some of your questions. Think about who you are as a practitioner and what your philosophy is and how you wish to run your practice, what your purpose is, and kind of look and say, do my values match the value of this agency? You can ask value questions if you wish to. There's so much you can do, because the truth of the matter is, I've said this a number of times, I'm going to say it again, from the moment you're in your very first hour of placement, it is your practice, not someone else's. It's not the agency's practice. You might be within their building, but it is your practice. Till the last hour of your counselling, you're in your practice. And you need to take control and ownership of your practice from minute one. And minute one starts when you're in placement. So preparatory work, what questions are you going to ask when you go for that placement interview?
Yeah, absolutely. I remember as a novice therapist going for my interview, sitting in a big circle of people, shaking. I was shaking because I was dead scared, and I was sat next to, and I remember this so clearly, a woman who was a really experienced psychoanalytical therapist, and she'd volunteered to get some form of accreditation. So she was already qualified and very well qualified and very well experienced. And I was sitting there, and I said, I'm not sure what we're going to ask. And she said, when I came here, I asked to see the room to make sure that the room. And I thought, oh my God, how brave are you? How I could just about manage to get who are you? My name's Rory out. But she was asking to see the rooms. And through the years, I really valued that very short interaction that I had with the person, the colleague who sat next to me, because I realized she cared enough to risk not getting a placement to make sure that the environment that she was practicing in was safe, presumably for herself and her clients.
Yeah. And that's it at the end of the day, isn't it? She recognized that it was her practice. And she wouldn't practice if she and the client was not safe. It's your practice. Just a shout out, if you are looking at going into placement, all the best to you. It is such an area of rich learning, and we wish you the very, very best of that. And as we kind of, turn from our student check-in, we look to the counselling digital revolution, that is of the now, how technology is being used kind of to bridge that gap and the distance, and allow counselling via email, via telephone, via video chat. And that is really an area of development, and that's why we've popped this section in. And today we're going to be speaking about a very interesting concept called the black hole effect. So without any further ado, let's go into Counselling Digital Revolution.
Digital Counselling Revolution.
Yes, the black hole effect, it's one of the theories, one of the many theories that anybody who's working online, especially I think on the telephone, needs to understand. And I want to share a little story about my own recent experience of the black hole effect to give you an idea of what it feels like. A fun fact about me is I'm an online gamer. I sometimes play online games. One game I play is a survival game where you meet other survivors online and you, basically you survive. You have to kind of loot houses and grow food and that type of thing. And I met up with an American player online called Chris. And we spent a good 2 hours together looting houses and playing online. And he said, I'm just going around the corner to have a look in this house. And he never came back. And I was left in this kind of town online, and he'd gone. And one of the strange phenomenons of this, even though it was just an online game, was I began to feel a bit isolated and a bit lost, and a little bit confused about where he'd gone. And I realized that this was the black hole effect in play, because the game was so immersive that I'd effectively had feelings of loss. And it was really, really strange, because I was sitting in the studio here on the other workstation, in no danger at all, loved by my family. But I was mourning this disappearance and loss of a complete stranger I'd only met for 2 hours. And I knew what to do. I just switched the computer off, went downstairs and reconnected with people, and I reset. In the world of therapy, though, this can have a profound effect on the therapist. So if you take the experience of working with a client, maybe working on the phone with them, and all of a sudden they go and they never come back, it can leave therapists with a lot of unanswered questions, such as, why did they go? Did I do something wrong? Are they all right? Are they safe? And it can bring up a lot of anxieties. And the black hole effect can be quite profound. And it was really only when I was playing the game that I realized just how profound it was. And one of the things that had left me is that when I think of the interaction, as I'm talking about it now, I still feel a slight amount of loss. I'm transported there, transferential kind of historic transference. I know that, it's a game, but in therapy, it can be quite devastating. And I think, if you're a supervisor of someone who is working via the phone, because the phone, I think it's a different medium. You're listening to a voice as opposed to seeing a voice and a face. I think that if you're a supervisor, you need to be well aware of that and how departure of a client for any reason could impact on the supervisee. And if you are working on the phone, you need to be aware of that phenomena for yourself.
Yeah, working online means we need to understand cyber psychology. And of course, the black hole effect, the phrase was coined by John Sula in 1997. He wrote a blog called The Black Hole Effect of Cyberspace. We've got an article on counsellingtutor.com on the black hole effect, and we'll definitely add it into this into the show notes of this podcast. And we also have a handout that kind of explains the black hole effect. You can get that by going to counsellingtutor.com, click on the podcast tab right at the top of the page, navigate to podcast episode 163. That's today's podcast. The link to that article will be there, and the free download will be there as well. So you can just go and get that free of charge. But it is interesting. So it's kind of explaining what happens when there is an unplanned, very abrupt ending. Now, we cover endings in our counselling studies, and we all have our own relationship with endings, but endings can be tricky at the best of times. When that ending is really sudden, and the client just disappears, whether that be via email, on telephone, or you've got an upcoming video call coming with them and they just don't turn up for it, it causes this effect. And it's not that they're not there. That's not the black hole. I mean, that is the black hole because they're not there. And now it's what, Rory, you have just mentioned there. It's the feeling that you can be left with. Maybe they were away on holiday. Did they actually get my message? Did I press send? Maybe they're troubled. Maybe they're hurt. Should I call emergency service? Maybe they did reply. Maybe it's in my spam box. Let me check my spam box. They've got back to me. Maybe they want to keep me sitting on I know what it is. They want to keep me sitting on the edge of my seat, and we can really start imagining, and really it's transference. We're taking that is not real, making it up, and kind of projecting it onto that. When working online, it's a really good idea to kind of speak with the client during the initial stages, during the contact stages, speaking about, online, that there is a disconnect because we're not there in person. What should I do if you don't turn up for a session? What is it that I should do? And kind of contract around that. And it may be that the decision is made, do nothing, and that's fine because it's their choice to enter therapy or not therapy. But it gives you a place to go to if they don't come. You can go, what was in the contract? Oh, it was, I do nothing. Maybe contact this emergency number or contact this number. So kind of have a think about how you might work with that. And again, it's all about the supervision. This is about the unseen and the newness of this online technology and therapy. There's things we don't see, don't fully understand yet, and it's about going into therapy and taking it in on a regular basis and working with a supervisor, into supervision, taking it in and working with a supervisor who understands what the black hole effect is.
Yes, and the black hole effect does key into another theory by Sula, which we covered in podcast 162, which was disinhibition effect. People become disinhibited when working online. So it may be that a client just decides to go and just puts the phone down, and or disconnects the video feed. So it's really, really important if you are practicing online that you have a really good understanding or at least working knowledge of these specific theories, disinhibition effect and the black hole effect. And it's crucial that your supervisor has this information, because if you go to your supervisor and say, I've got this strange feeling about this client, I can't contact them, your supervisor needs to understand that there is a process specific to the cyber world, to the online world going on. And it is, as Ken said, a specific form of transference.
Yeah. And, this goes two ways. So we've spoken very much now about the black hole effect in relation to you as the counselor and what that might bring up for you. But the other side of the coin is how that is experienced from a client's perspective. So just to paint a scenario, there is a power cut in your area, your internet goes down, and you're not able to make the appointment with the client that had been set, and for some reason you don't have their telephone number. So you're not able to touch base with them. How might that client feel? So for clients, the black hole effect can bring up feels of abandonment and despair, waiting for the counsellor to respond. Maybe they've met with you before and disclosed something they've never told to anybody before, and then all of a sudden the counsellor's gone, not there again. Did I chase them away? So we need to think from the client's perspective as well. And again, this is worked on in your contracting. We educate the client, no matter what modality you're working to. And I know some modalities you will kind of share the model with the client. This is not about models. This is about phenomena that can occur so even if you're working person-centered, you might explain what the black hole effect is to the client and say, this is a very real thing. So if for any reason I, as the counselor, don't show up for our session, what are we going to do? And it's about having a plan in place, having an agreement in place so that the client and yourself have a plan to go to if this should happen. It's an important topic, Rory.
It is, absolutely. And one of the reasons why in online therapy, it's recommended you have two channels of communication. So if I'm working in a video feed, which I'm doing now with Ken, really, we're connected on the video. To my right, I've got my mobile phone. So if I lose my internet connection, I can just phone Ken up and say, what happened there? And we can keep contact. And again, that's in therapy, that would be contracted. If you're working, whichever medium, online medium you're working with, it's a really good idea to have a second line channel of communication. So if you lose your primary communication, or your video feed fails, you can contact the client. Maybe you could contact the client if you're on phone by text. Maybe that could be a second form of communication. But it's all the new thinking that needs to be put in place if you're working online.
I think it highlights the importance of correct training. If you are working using technology, it is so important to do some formal training to work safely and ethically with your clients. There are many amazing providers of courses out there on online and telephone counselling. We at Counselling Tutor also have a course, and if you're interested in our online and telephone counselling course, you can get more information by just going to counsellingtutor.com. All the information is there, and we are incredibly proud to say that the Counselling Tutor online and telephone counselling course has just been awarded the Quality Check training recognition by the National Counselling Society. That's the NCS. So that is a proud moment for us because we put a lot of work into that course. So if you're interested, like I say, counsellingtutor.com. And as we kind of move away from counselling in this digital revolution that we're facing at the moment, we look at Practice Matters, where we look at what may present within our therapy rooms. And today we're going to be looking at preparing to work with self-harm. So without any further ado, straight into Practice Matters.
Practice Matters.
Well, one of the things that any therapist is going to work with at some time in their career is self-harm. And Ken and myself were just speaking before we went live with this. I went to record this, and self-harm rates have certainly shot through the roof in recent years. And one of the reasons that this may have been happening, or they're pretty sure one of the main reasons, is because of social media. This social media phenomenon where people can make themselves more attractive. I used the term in inverted commas, and this kind of push, certainly within young girls, to make themselves more beautiful than beautiful, can cause a lot of self-harm. I was a school counsellor for 7 years, and I can say that even before we had kind of the Instagram revolution, it was bad then. I worked with a number of clients who had self-harmed in many different ways, including taking poison, which is one that is sometimes forgotten. People drinking bleach or people drinking toxic substances. So anybody who's a therapist now really has to have an understanding of the different ways that people can self-harm, and more crucially, I think, how it might appear in the therapy room. And a few years ago, I was talking to a colleague, and she was talking about a client she had who was a rugby player, and every time the client appeared in the therapy room, he would be black and blue. And she said to him, "You're always looking beaten up. You're always looking like you've been in a fight." And he said, "I play rugby." He said, "It's a rough game." And she was kind of talking to someone who knew a lot about rugby, and he said, "It's not that rough. No one comes in every single week looking like they've been beaten up." And what happened was, through the dialogue, through the therapeutic process, it turned out that the person, the player, the rugby player, was putting himself in harm's way to deliberately self-harm. He was being self-harmed by proxy.
Wow.
And that came out in therapy. And the therapist was successfully able to help that client. So self-harm doesn't always have to be, I would say, the usual signs such as cutting or self-harming in that way. It can come in many forms, and we need to be really aware of that.
Yeah, definitely. I think that the first step in understanding and working with self-harm is educating yourself, doing the correct CPD related to working with that as a presentation, understanding how it works. So like yourself, Rory, I worked as a college counsellor for some time, and it was a regular presentation. And in my CPD, I kind of learnt that it kind of follows a cycle, self-harm. in that very often, and this is not always, but this is kind of considered a model where a person would act out and self-harm, and that would bring a sense of relief. So this is kind of the end of the cycle. It would bring a sense of relief followed by a period of remorse, shame, guilt at self-harming. Why did I do that? I shouldn't have done that. I'm never going to do that again. Followed by a kind of a little bit of a honeymoon period where the emotions are subsided again, followed by a build-up where the stresses and strains of life become more rigorous and kind of weigh upon that person, where I can't cope anymore, and then the option of self-harm becomes looks like a good idea again, and it kind of follows this pattern that goes on and on and on. It's a horrible place to be stuck, and when you speak with someone who's self-harming, they don't like where they are. They want out of there, but it is almost being stuck there against their will. Of course, the mechanisms behind self-harm vary from cutting to, as you said, Rory, and in the very severe forms, basically putting your life in danger. And the interesting thing is, when a person is engaging in life-threatening behaviors such as taking poisons, maybe cutting in the throat area, with self-harm, they're not trying to end their life. They're not trying to end their life. They're trying to self-harm because that's kind of their acting out at the end of that cycle.
Yeah, sometimes the pain of the self-harm ameliorates the emotional pains that they're going through. It's a distraction, and I don't want to be too unkind when I say that, but that's what it is. The focus on the pain takes them away from the emotional pain. And that is why, through therapy, we can maybe help people, work with that emotional pain, or help them talk about what's going on for them, which lowers that. And I would also say that, if you're working with children or young people, to be aware of the huge amount of websites that are out there that actually promote self-harm. I came across a few years ago a website that promoted cutting and running the wound under warm water, which of course, the wound can't coagulate, can't seal, and could lead to, in extreme cases, death. And these websites are out and about. So, you'll find if you work with young people, they may actually tell you about them. And certainly displaying wounds, displaying the aftermath of self-harm on social media is becoming it's becoming quite an epidemic now. I read a recent report that self-harm trebles amongst women in the past 14 years. Trebled.
Yeah, that's huge.
That is a striking figure. And part of that is the fact that, there is a push to make yourself more beautiful. That's been long discussed in feminist circles. It's been discussed in books like The Beauty Myth for years, about the fact that there's a whole industry saying that you're not beautiful enough. And also men's self-harm as well. I think that it's not just a phenomenon that that women have. Men can self-harm, and I think we have to be aware of that. And they can self-harm in particular ways. Certainly around the genital area is a popular area for self-harm. So be on the alert if you're a therapist for clients who speak about this, because they're ameliorating the internal pain that they're feeling emotionally.
And it's tricky because we're talking about preparing to work with self-harm. We've spent a bit of time speaking about what the statistics look like, what self-harm is, and how that might present itself. But you're kind of in a position where you're working with this presentation. And I think one of the things it does is it highlights the importance of correct assessment on intake. It highlights correct contracting in terms of confidentiality. How do you work with that? Do you need to break confidentiality? And this is going to depend on how you are working. Are you in private practice? Are you working within a school environment? Are you working in a college? Are you working in an agency? understand and know what that looks like. I mean, there is a harm to self, harm to others clause that is often in a contract. Does that apply to this? If it does apply to this, at what level does it apply? At what severity does it apply? And the reason that I'm suggesting this is, having worked with this presentation, is very often this presentation is kept secret. It is hidden. So a person who is maybe self-harming on their arms may wear long sleeves all the time to not show this, and often it is hidden from family members, from parents. So the person carries this alone. And if they get into a situation where they're in a trusting relationship with you as the therapist, and they go, you know what, here's somebody I can trust, here's somebody I can tell, and that information is taken and immediately they are surrounded by support people, how is that a breach of that person's trust? You need to work this out for yourself. I'm not here giving the answers, but these are the considerations in working with self-harm. It's about, for me, it is about empathy. It's about understanding, like any other presentation, who that person is, looking through their frame of reference. I'm a person-centered therapist, so my role within the therapy is not to try and fix the client. It is to understand them, hear them, be with them through the pain that they are facing. Maybe there is psychological education that I can give to that person, but I'm not there to diagnose and I'm not there to fix. So it can be pretty tricky to work with, and it's going to vary from person to person. There are maybe people listening to this who will disagree with the way that I was working with it in my practice, but it's about you, your practice, and how you work with that. I just got a statistic here from one of our lectures. We've got a lecture on preparing to work with self-harm in our CPD library. It's a counsellor CPD library, and it says the UK has the highest self-harm rate of any country in Europe, with an estimated 400 in 100,000 people self-harming. And these figures are likely to be higher, as many people who self-harm do not tell anybody about it. And you may be the first person to hear about somebody that's self-harming. How do you manage that? How do you work with that?
Absolutely, and strangely enough, next to me in a drawer in my studio, I have a little plastic bag full of elastic bands, coloured elastic bands that I used to give to young people who used to self-harm. And if they were cutting, I'd say, well, look, I can't stop you from cutting, but maybe if you try putting an elastic band around your wrist and flicking it, it hurts like hell, but you're not going to bleed out and you're not going to get infections. And I used to give those out quite regularly to my clients. And again, I guess it's where you think your practice is. Some practitioners may say, well, I wouldn't do that. That's kind of more diagnostic and more directive. I took the view that the clients I work with were in clear and present danger with some of the behaviours that they're acting out. And, it's not something that was going to stop overnight, but maybe what I could do is help them be safe as the process of therapy started to take place. And, there are lots of courses on, how to work with clients who self-harm. But yeah, and that, I would say to you, the lecture I gave on self-harm, that is a stunning statistic that we in the UK have the highest self-harm in Europe. That is not a figure. It's any level to be proud of as a society.
Yeah, very much so. It's. I think you went into this saying at some level, at some point, somebody's going to walk in and self-harm is going to present within the therapy room. Just kind of as we end this, different methods of self-harming: taking too many tablets, cutting yourself, burning yourself, banging your head or throwing yourself against a hard object, punching yourself, sticking things into your body, swallowing things, and even hair pulling or eyelash pulling is a form of self-harm. Can be. Not necessarily if somebody pulls out a hair that they're self-harming. It could just be a habit, but it can also be a way of self-harming. It's producing pain. And of course, when pain is produced, we have endorphins, which are created. And it's almost an addictive cycle. The cycle being the emotional suffering, the emotional overload, the panic, the self-harm, that temporary relief, and then the guilt and the shame, and then back to the emotional suffering again. It kind of just goes round and round, similar to alcohol and substance misuse, similar cycle.
Absolutely, and yes, the eyelash pulling and the hair pulling is called trichotillomania.
It is.
Or trish, as it's sometimes referred to by those who do that. And it is a form of self-harm, and it's also very addictive. Ken's absolutely right. You produce endorphins, which is a kind of painkiller to the body, and you can become addicted on your own painkiller, and you can have withdrawal from it. So just be aware of that, and why don't you Google trichotillomania or trish, Trich, and put hair pulling, and you'll find lots of useful resources. And that happens more than you would think. That happens more than you would think. It's like a lot of self-harm. It's just hidden.
Indeed. So just end on a few distraction techniques. Rory's already mentioned the elastic band, punching into a cushion, going for a walk, exercising, talking to someone, listening to music, writing about how you feel, drawing, nice long baths, or some of the distraction techniques when a person is there. But again, a lot of this stuff covered in the lecture. If you're interested in Rory's lecture on preparing to work with self-harm, you can find that by going to counsellingtutor.com, and all the information is right there. It's in our CPD library. It's on the homepage.
Yeah, well, what a podcast, if I do say so myself. We started with the student check-in, which is questions to ask at your placement interview. I can hear the scribbling and writing down now as people are making notes. We talked about the phenomena of the black hole effect, one that is known in the cyber world, but is now becoming more apparent in the world of online therapy. And then we finished on the sobering topic of self-harm. And as always, stay grounded, stay safe, and join the digital revolution.
If you're a qualified counsellor or psychotherapist, then why not check out the Counsellor CPD Library? Stay current with your CPD requirements with over 150 hours of academically rigorous, on-demand lectures you can stream to your device. For more information on the Counsellor CPD Library, visit counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.